Bonjour, good morning. This setup time always kills me. Yeah, when I can't really have the computer there up front, the tension. Well, I'll stick to English. As every year, I'm happy that I'm allowed to be in Paris. And I'm a little bit annoyed of myself that I am speaking to you in English still. There's too many languages to learn, and to have a presentation skilled French is kind of out of the realm, during the day-to-day work, which means, unfortunately, you'll have to deal with English. It's a technical day today, so most of the technical people speak English anyways, I guess. Otherwise, if anybody is not speaking English, show your hand. Okay, that's the trick question, because I now assume everybody understands me. If this is not the case, if anybody has any question any time during what I'm talking about, just raise your hand, and if I don't see you, because there's blinding lights coming towards me, then just make yourself heard, and I'm trying to answer immediately. Or at least take care of the question immediately, and then we'll see where it brings us. So for each presentation, I am asked to turn in the slide deck, which means, of course, I'll start it with a slide deck, which has the amazing title and the amazing subtitle, as our template says, Getting Used to the API. And I couldn't think of a better subtitle than 7 Cogs Reloaded. Who here is still remembering 7 Cogs? Okay, several people do. Who here knows of Bruno Admin? That's a few more, that's funny. Okay. Because Bruno Admin used to be the default administrator in a default or demo setup of Liferay that came with Liferay Community Edition, I think until 6.0. And unfortunately, then it was discontinued. James Faulkner, our past community manager, did some effort to revive it, to blog about some opportunities to get the code back, to move it to the next API level. That was back in 6.1 times. And, well, during one evening, I was sitting with a glass of wine, and I was thinking of, actually, what can I do to get this back? And for right now, as this is the first session after breakfast, I'll say an apple hit me on my head, and I thought of 7 Cogs. And, I'm going to try to bring 7 Cogs back, which, for now, is a plan. But there is something that I would actually like you to consider, because there is a background story to it. Now, first of all, 7 Cogs used to be... without counting, I always said it was between 1,000 and 10,000 lines of code that ran straight through, top to bottom. It's basically just API level code that says, oh, let's create a site, let's create a user account, let's provide that user account with specific permissions, let's create a page, let's create an article, let's put that article on a page, which is all the stuff that you can do with Liferay anyways. And we have measures. I guess I should present something here so that the screen does not blank. So we have measures. We have import, export. We have Lars. We have staging. We have all that kind of thing to give you the flexibility of bringing content from one to another. I still love 7 Cogs. It's my favorite plugin ever. Why? Because it's, let's say, 1,000 lines of code that run top to bottom. You can actually execute it. You can run it in a debugger and see how the API is called. How do I create a new page? How do I create an article in the journal system, so in the web content system? How do I configure a web content display portlet and place it on a page? And with that, you basically had executable documentation. So just hook up your debugger, set a breakpoint at the beginning of the 7cogs plugin. It only runs once, so that's the caveat. You'll have to wipe your database after that in order to run it again. But you can still see the code, even if you don't execute it. And, well, with that, I tried a bit, and I got a little bit inspired by a forum post that I saw recently where somebody said, oh, you know, whenever I have a top-level page, I don't want that to be a top-level page, but I want it to link to the first child of it. So I want the first page commonly to be a link to its first subpage, which is not there yet. And if I think about this, well, you can easily customize Liferay's API. Yes, everything is fine. I am frequently working with customers who paint themselves into a corner. So you paint the floor, and then suddenly you realize you're done with almost everything in the room, but you're somewhere in that corner and there's no more door. Which means you'll have to maintain the code. And there are actually a lot of things in Liferay that you can do with just a very few lines of code, so they are kind of future-proof. I say kind of because I had some work resurrecting all of that 5.2, 6.0, and partly 6.1 7cogs API, because Liferay's API changed, it evolved. And only from 6.2 to 7, or to DXP, we have this amazing upgrade wizard. Has anybody yet upgraded to either Liferay 7 or DXP and used the upgrade wizard, maybe? Nobody? Okay. Has anybody upgraded yet without using the upgrade wizard? Okay, we'll have something to do then. Now, let me tell you one thing. If you have some investment in code in Liferay 6.2 and you want to upgrade that code to DXP or Liferay 7, it's actually quite easy. Well, let's say we've got the routine part covered. There's a long, long, long list of breaking changes in the API that you could read and then execute on your own. But Liferay IDE, the Eclipse development tool, also has an integrated wizard which has exactly this file in a machine-readable form, which tells you in your 6.2 plugin, you are addressing this class, which now has moved to another package. Should I do it for you? And you'd say yes, and it does it for you. And, oh, actually, this API is still there, but it requires an additional parameter. Should I enter it for you? And you say yes. Or you provide a different default than this tool does. So you basically get a checklist that you go through from top to bottom. With your existing code on 6.2, that's easy. And then what I want to do is to introduce you to some thoughts how you can use Liferay just by kind of exploring the API, not really using, because if I tell you now, this is the API, and the 5th parameter here needs that particular attention, and the 6th and the 12th parameter needs another bit of attention, I guess as soon as I leave the stage, or even earlier, nobody will still remember. So, warning up front, this is API level access. There is no undo. If you execute something, it's done. So have your, what's this? Backup ready. That's a backup, and as I like to say, a backup is only allowed to be called a backup if you have recently demonstrated that you can restore with what you call a backup. So you can still break things. There is no, do you really want to question if you use the API to bring in some code. Now, I told you I am asked to provide a slide deck, and that was the slide deck that you can download after the presentation. So if you want to, be my guest. Now, let me start with the very first one, because the rest will be code. I hope that those in the last row do not realize now that they made a bad choice, because that will teach you that it's nice to sit in the front. I've actually chosen a slightly larger font, but if I go much larger, nothing will be seen anymore in the IDE anyways. So let me grow this a little bit. I shrink it again. No? Ah, okay. Okay, I'll leave it that size. Whatever. So the very first thing that I have to embarrass myself with is one of my best friends in Java land is the four letters SYSO. And then Control Enter. In Eclipse, that expands to system out print line. And I am not ashamed of myself to say I love that over logging, because this is all proof of concept code, and I don't bother about logging and about configuring and determining is this log level, debug level, info, error, or whatever. I'll just system out print. Bear with me. If somebody completely dislikes it, just mentally replace system out print with log. Now I have, let me bring you the two browsers that I have. I have a very young Liferay DXP here, and I have two user accounts already there. And the very first task that I solved is basically this very simple: I want to create a different page, I want to create a second page, and that should always link to its first child. What did I do? Well, first thing, system out print is my friend. I just assumed layout is the API name for a page. So whenever somebody creates a new page, the service layout local service will be called with a function called add layout. For those of you who have never seen Liferay's API, layout is indeed the technical name for a page. So what did I do? I just checked, I overrode, I provided a service wrapper, which you can find on Blade. I provided a service wrapper, which is intercepting all of the calls, and I just said, I'll assume it's probably this call, so add layout, and I have my printing service wrapper, and I'm deploying this, which is publishing, and whenever I'm now going in and I create a new page, which, whoops, is, no, sorry, it's down here. Whenever I'm creating a new public page, I now get some information on what this page does. I'll just make it a very blunt and empty page, ASDF, so that's it. Now let's go back, and there's my system out print, quite uninteresting. Now, what does make up a portlet page? This is it. I create just another one just to see what I need to do. Add public page, and I'll make this a link page of the type, link to a page of this site. Create that page again, and now I see I have some type settings in here. Link to layout ID 33. Well, that was actually enough for me to just start exploring and looking at what are these type settings like. So I've checked a few, printed a little bit more, and let me remove this again. Now let's go for the original request, the hierarchy enforcer wrapper. It's, again, overriding exactly the same method. Let me deploy this already so it's ready when I want to get in. You see the complexity of this code easily fits on this screen with a slightly larger font even in Eclipse. So if I just maximize this screen, it actually really fits on the screen, the whole class. What do I do? Whenever somebody adds a layout, I'm checking, is this a top-level layout? And is it of type portlet, and is it not hidden? So some of the things that I've discovered during my implementation, I'll create a new second level page. I'll change some type settings, and then I'll create the top level page, which means whenever I'm creating a page which is on the top level, I am creating actually two pages, which is the link to the page. So very simple. Let me demonstrate this. Did I deploy? Yes, I did. I'll add a public page. And this is now my test. I choose empty page, so everything is fine. Add the page. And see, I have a page called test, which links to its first child, test. So if I am on here, I basically land on the first child. Stupidly simple, 2 lines of code, and this is the maintainable part. So all of Liferay's API, all of Liferay's UI is changeable. That's what we claim, but you don't need to go to the UI layer in order to do that. And I'm just trying to well, spark some thought of what can you do, how easily can you do things when you basically step a little bit back and try to think about what does Liferay do, how does Liferay do that, and how does it keep all of those layouts in check, how does it position portlets on the page. Now for the next parts, I probably can't go into too many details here. I have created, and this will end up on GitHub probably today. Well, later today. I didn't manage to get it up there because, you know, preparation always takes until the last minute. There is another plugin here which does not deploy. Why does it not deploy? Well, let's go the other way. Add and remove. Now it's there. Started, let's clear the console. And I've created myself some test environment where I said I want to use some changes on the API or some things on the API which I want to check on. I just need to wait for this to load. And I have 2 more. Actually, I'll add these 2. No, I'll add these with my tool. So I have my API exploration portlet, where I can now also programmatically create a page. How boring! I'll tell you. I'll show you one of the examples a bit later, where you can actually really use it well for. I can add a portlet to this page, and this is how I explore. How do I add a portlet to this page? How do I not only create an empty page, how do I add a portlet to this page? So the implementation is actually quite easy. I have it's the simplest possible Vue.jsp that you can see. It's actually enumerating all of the portlets in here. And I want to check some page. I also wrote a page information portlet, which I want to add to this page. And the page information basically just tells me what kind of type settings I have on this page, and it ends up on the bottom. So let's get rid of the mountains. So it's down here. Now I can see my page has a column 1 with several portlets on there. That gives me a hint on how that is stored in Liferay, and I can now check where does Liferay actually change these values, and I can see how they are changed, how they are updated, and so on. Now, when I add another portlet to this page, which is the portlet information, no. Too many portlets starting with portlet. There it is. I didn't bother to sort them. You know, sorting would be boring. This is a hash map, so it's sorted by hash code, and I'm not quite good in calculating hash code. Now I have a portlet information, and actually let me just add another web content display here so that we can see some fun, and the web content display portlet goes down here. Now, with the portlet information, I'll show you the code immediately. With the portlet information, I can actually see what's the configuration of all of these portlets. Let me select some web content, and the display, the configuration will be visible. This is getting physically hard. Did anybody ever do some performance tuning? Especially on the local development machine. So, I now have one portlet down here, which is configured to do something, and when I check the configuration here, I can basically see what does my page information portlet do. There is no configured preferences. There is a web content portlet display, and that has some preferences. It has the DDM template key, which will come in handy later, basic web content. So it's a very basic article. It's the standard structure, standard template. We have the asset entry ID, enable view count increment, and most importantly, group ID and article ID. This is what I find. So when I add a web content display portlet, I probably want to configure it with exactly these values. Now, let me go into the trivial code for these portlets, which are, let me just go into the portlet configuration portlet. That doesn't fit on a single screen anymore, but it basically initializes, if I choose a portlet, it initializes these things, and then it initializes the form where it enumerates all of the portlets. And the portlet information that's basically another one-liner, which you can easily find within Liferay's code. Portlet preferences, factory util, what's this? Get layout portlet setup, where you say, I would like to have the configuration for this portlet on that page. That's it. And then you get the portlet itself, from which you can get the display name, and in the end the preferences, which you then can just show. Now, where does this all come in handy? This is quite practical if you now think of my personal pages. Is anybody using personal pages in Liferay? A personal site like we do on liferay.com with a personal profile and so on. If you do or if you don't, is anyone using page templates or site templates? Yeah, so there are a few more. Have you ever wished page templates or site templates would be a bit more flexible? So they're good to do exactly what they do, and if you want to do a little bit more or a lot more, they're actually really hard. Now, it's not a lot of work. Going from site templates to the API is actually quite a bit of work, yes, grant you that, but it's actually code that runs from top to bottom that's not too hard. So what I did is basically just a very simple use case. I've said every single user has their personal site in Liferay, and starting with Liferay 7, starting with Liferay DXP, with both, they cannot edit that site by default anymore, which is a good thing. Is anybody here working in help desk and answering the inquiries of people who have destroyed their personal site just because they can, and then they can't give the information back? So right now you cannot change your site anymore. Somebody has to change your site for yourself. And you can have user groups. You can do that through the API, not through the API, through the user interface. You can have user groups which provide personal sites to all of the users. But if you want to be more flexible, what do? Somebody has to maintain hundreds, thousands of user sites. Now there's one thing, granted, I did not performance tune this. I do not know what happens if you have 1 million users and you have individual user sites for 1 million users. I just don't know. But if you want that, if this is your use case and this is what is required by yourself, that everybody has their own personal thing, then it's actually quite easy to set up a personal site, it's in yet another project, and I'll show you the code, the amount of code before I'll just click the button because there's not much of a UI. There's basically a user maintenance portlet, and this is the real stuff stolen from 7cogs, which will go onto GitHub. And it basically has a very simple action handler that says add layouts, which, I don't know, is basically another word for do it in this case. And it's all proof of concept level code, so I'm just doing this for a single user. I started doing it for all users, or actually for the first 10 users, whoever that is, but now I'm actually getting just a single user. And what do I do then? I will, let's see, this is the main code that I've tried to make kind of, well, viewable. Now what's up here? I'll add a layout to the user site, choose a specific layout, 1-to-1 columns. You might recognize that from the user interface. The actual name is quite similar, and you can easily find that through system.out.print. And I'm logging this as well. I add a portlet ID, a portlet with this ID that I happen to know into column 1. So this is how you build a page with a particular portlet in a particular column. I add a journal content display portlet, which I found, journal content portlet, in column 2. And then I went through a few null pointer exceptions to figure out what the service context need. Has anybody ever worked with service context? That's a mess, because it's basically a placeholder for 10 more parameters, of which probably 1 or 2 are required. And if you run into a null pointer exception, you'll quickly figure out which one is the required one. So that's quite easy. I'll create a journal article, I'll configure the journal content portlet, and I'll add yet another portlet to the page to column 4. That's it. Now, this all is not necessarily API code. There is, wait a second, down here is the meat of the matter. This is how to add a layout to this group with less parameters and a lot of defaults. Then we'll have add a portlet to a page. Very simple code. We'll have add resources, update layout. Well, those are all used internally. And add a journal article. This also takes a few defaults. That's it. So right now, I am able, if I add this portlet again to my page. Oh, and let me see if I correctly cleaned up, because I have a second user. Now, if you see the bottom right browser, that's my add extra user. The top left browser is myself. So that's why I'm using two browsers here, and I've positioned them somewhat off to each other. They look the same. If you look closely, this one is Chromium, the other one is Firefox. So let me just check Horst's profile page. Let me see. I don't know why my development computer is so slow, but we'll see. He shall be there quickly. So there are already a few pages, demo and test. I didn't clean them up properly, but I'll have another one. I'll just add the user layout maintenance up here. Now what this does, you've seen the code where I've said, okay, I'm only doing that for Horst, which is the other user, for all users that have that email address, and naturally that's only one. And I'm just creating a single page for him, and in lack of a better word, and because I have not cleaned up his profile, I'll just name it Paris, so that you recognize that Paris has not been here before. Let's create that page, and let's hope that everything worked. At least it says here your request was successful. And I'll reload the page, and I see my Paris page here. I can click it, and there you can see, now I'll full screen it. There you can see the portlet information portlet in top, the new article, which includes some random number. I basically just use that to make sure this is actually a new article that I've created. And then the page information here as well, where you can see the layout template ID and so on. And how is this page configured? That's easy. Now, with this style, I can easily update thousands of users in a scripted way, when I can say, okay, site templates are a nice thing. They do work, yes. And actually, if you can choose them, I would say choose them. Over the API, it's better to use them anyways. But if you need more functionality, if you need something in particular for certain users, if you need something in addition to site templates, let's say just for your administrators or for your special, like for your really good customers or for anybody with specific permissions, where you want to have specifically maintained and tailored code, maybe imported information from somewhere that needs to go in a more elaborate place than the notification portlet or email or something like that. This is one way to easily just import content, and it's actually trivial. My first contact with the 7cogs plugins was, oh my God, there's 10 parameters to the API. And these are only the short methods. These are not the very elaborate ones. You can easily find APIs with 20, 30 parameters. Just create a user account. Oh, by the way, I stole some, actually it's MIT license. There is a random user creator, which is also a very nice way to explore the API. Let me demonstrate that if I find it. Create random users. Did you know there's a, let's hope I have, oh, I have internet, yeah. Did you know there's a random user API site, like that you can get random user accounts with meaningful names and that you can even get images? So let's see, my current users here. I now have 2 users, that's myself and Horst. And one of my colleagues, or no longer colleagues, he sadly left Liferay, but this is the waiting sound, waiting melody. So these are the 2 users that we currently have. Let me just shortcut and open another tab. When I create random users, and let's say I'll create 5 random users, this can reach out to the API. And is there a breakpoint or what happened here? I had a breakpoint in here, okay. So now I can actually debug through the API, create random users, reaching out, but I'm running out of time here, so I won't do that. I'll just continue running it. And I'm now back. Request is successful. I'll check back with my user account. And I have 5 meaningful users account with meaningful names. And actually, they even have profile pics. So quite nice for your demo environments. And the amount of code that we have in this is also something, if you've seen it once, it's totally trivial. I would say the main part deals with JSON parsing from random user. So from the API, it just gets some information from random user. And then it uses Liferay's API to create a contact, to update the contact, and to add a user. And this is one of the functions, one of the API functions that actually take a lot of parameters. That being said, for a while, I said, if you see a function with more than 7 parameters, that's the only thing that you can say for sure is you have missed one, which is what service context is for. But just seeing how you create a user, how you easily create a user, and then, well, seeing this is the whole amount of code with all the boilerplate. And there's the source here as well. Where did I get it from? This is all the code that you need to create meaningful user accounts, plus some download stuff where you download a picture. Yeah, I mean, that's trivial, but that's what you need to do in Java just to download something from somewhere. It's basically all boilerplate, and it's very simple. So what does this mean? Well, let me see. Did I forget anything very important? I don't think so. At least we can go without. And you'll find the rest on GitHub very soon. Yeah, I'll close with this one, but you'll find it all on GitHub very soon, because there is one more thing that I have implemented here that I would like to just tell you and not show you, because in the end it would just work, and I don't know if that is such an impressive thing. Has anyone ever imported users to user groups from LDAP, for example, and then they're in user groups? It's probably common, right? Have you tried adding those user groups to an organization? Tried? Who has tried it? Who has found it? Like, where does it work? Does it work? Did it work? I didn't find it. Because that's the one combination that you can't do. There is no user interface for it. There just is none. Now another caveat. I did not, not this one, but that's probably in here. That's probably not in here. It's here. So this is the amount of code, of API code, that you need in order to do that. It might be an oversight on the user interface. It might be a performance detriment. I don't know. But you can add user groups to organizations. This is one of the things that is just missing on the user interface. 4 lines of code. 3 of them are actually fetching all of the parameters. And then one, this one, is actually doing the trick. That's all you need. So if you really have that need, you can test it, and you're not tied to what Liferay offers you on the user interface. You can write your own user interface on top of Liferay's API. That actually works quite well. But you can also go completely without user interface. There's a scripting console. You can do that in Groovy. You can do that in whatever. You can write your own plugins, and that actually works. What did I want to do with that? And I'll try. Does everyone hear me in the back as well? So what do you do with that, or what do I want to do with that? I actually want to spark your curiosity to, well, take a look at the API and see what kind of things you can do with trivial steps on the API. Because so often I see people finding or having a requirement, solving that with complex code that is really, really, really hard to maintain. And in the end, for the next upgrade, they're asking us, hey, can you please help us bring this forward to the next version? And they're mad at us because Liferay makes it so hard to upgrade. Granted, not every single use case falls into this category, but the more use cases you can have in this category of, I can condense it down to, let's say, a screen full of API calls, and that's it. Sorry, yeah, for the recording, right? Yes. I always forget that. I tell others, make sure you use a microphone for recording. Okay. So when you can solve something with a little bit of code, with less than a screen full of code, and just proper documentation, then you basically have won. And with that, I would like to go back to this screen and give you some hints on where you can find more. And I'll close with this, because you can find more on dev.liferay.com, which is our documentation site. And if you have looked there 3 months ago and you did not find anything, be aware that this is updated every now and then. Every week there is a new article, there's new tutorials and so on. Follow, where is it, the third one in that, Liferay Docs on Twitter. They do tweet about significant new updates to the documentation that are in there. So if you didn't find something in there once, go again. Customer Liferay.com is basically the same thing plus the DXP documentation. So anything that's only DXP will be documented on customer.liferay.com. Blade samples, I am working on, well, shaming people to not have enough Java docs in there so that we have more Java doc, more documentations, more samples in there. Please help me doing that. or submit something. And then there's 2 more blogs. There's David Nebinger, who is currently blogging about the more technical stuff of how do you actually work with OSGI, what tricks can you do with OSGI. And they are really worth reading. Whatever David says is basically, hey, I've tried this, and it failed, and this is the way I got it working. So he gets things working, and that's the more hardcore stuff. And I couldn't resist dropping that 6.17 cogs article from James in here. I hope I've sparked some interest, and well, if I did, you'll find my GitHub repository. My name is Olaf K, just as my Twitter handle, and I'm happy to talk to you during the day, actually both days. I'll be here until tomorrow.